So today we have a special guest, the CTO of Lightning Labs, Olaoluwa.
Hey, good to be
Pleasure to have
here.
you on.
Yeah.
We're definitely going to get into your background, how you got started in the industry, but
Mhm.
just as the basis, um, teach me like I'm a sixth grader. What is the Lightning Network and why is it important?
uh, sure. All right, let me. No, definitely a good place to start. So the way
Walk me
Bitcoin
through.
works, you kind of like package like blocks up or transactions like blocks, right? Like a block is kind of like a fundamental unit. Once it's in a block, you can say it's confirmed. It can't be overridden. That's kind of like the whole global consensus type of thing. Once I see the money there, boom, it's mine. I can move it. And I'm not asking anyone about it, right? But obviously, Bitcoin has some constraints in that, like blocks are probabilistic. So it may take 10 minutes, it may take an hour, it may take 2 hours. Basically imagine being in line to buy something or online, something like that, and waiting just to be like, okay, well, it's been an hour, maybe it's going to come now. Try do the probability distribution and math, find out the expected, time to my payments get confirmed. That kind of has a bunch of constraints, right? So basically what, the Lightning Network is basically something we call payment channels. And the payment channel is basically kind of like a joint account between you and I. Let's say you and I have an account, basically. I put in one BTC, you put in one BTC, or let's say 10 million Satoshis, something, because that's one BTC, prices go up these days. Let's say we both have 1 million Satoshis in the channel, basically, it's kind of like a bar tab at that point, right? I can be like, okay, well, now you have, 2 million and I have 3 million, right? Then I can be like, okay, well, you have 3 million, then I have 1 million, right? So you can kind of update that off chain, right? That's what we refer to as off chain. So we basically have this account between you and I. Think of it I can write this check basically, and then I can rip it up. I can give you a new version of the check basically, right? And then now the things until you want to cash the check, we don't actually need to go back to the actual blockchain itself. Right, so that's kind of the concept of a payment channel, right? So with this, all of a sudden now I can kind of escape the constraints of the actual Bitcoin blockchain, rather than waiting, potentially 10 minutes for something to clear. This can basically be instantaneous, right? The other thing as well, people don't know how fees on the blockchain work today, and that typically you pay fees in proportion based to get the size of the transaction, and the fee market is very variable, right? So it's the case where it's I might not actually be able to something like 1 cent on chain, because maybe I'll pay 3 cents for the actual transaction fee, right? With Lightning, fees are much lower, so you basically send I send money between us back and forth without really worrying about the blockchain fees on the actual layer. But then the cool part is basically, so let's you have a friend, you have a channel with a friend, I have a channel with you as well too. I can then send money, to your other friend, via you. This is where the whole kind of routing thing comes into play, right? So similar to where the internet is basically just kind of a series of tubes where I have an ISP, I have Comcast or whatever else. Comcast has a tube with AT&T. I can then send packets via them to AT&T, right? It's basically the same thing but now with money. So it's kind of like payments as packets on the actual internet. And the cool thing about it is it's basically 100% open. You don't need to sign up. There's no ID verification. There's no constraints. There's no gatekeepers. It's a fully decentralized network, and this has a lot of really cool traits, because it basically allows kind of unbounded innovation, and anyone can just plug into it. Someone in Nigeria can just hop on the network, basically start having money moving back and forth without really having any other constraint, and that's really cool part about it. And let me know if I should run any of that back either. That was me. I slid a little
go
bit.
Roadrunner on it. You did go Roadrunner. Usain Bolt through the network. But I understand if we look at Bitcoin as the base layer protocol, this is a layer 2. Right.
Exactly.
And it just works for faster transactions. So you do the transact, because it takes a while for the base layer to validate each transaction. So you do it off chain, right? It's almost that you're on a highway and you kind of go off the highway to do the transaction, right? But my confusion is, okay, how does it get rerouted back to the base layer blockchain? Because it all has to be validated on the base layer node. How does that work? Because I understand going off chain, but then how do you come back so it's validated on the base layer?
Oh yeah, really good question. So basically, whenever you want to get onto the network, let's say kind of going from layer 1 to layer 2, going up a level, basically that's one Bitcoin transaction on chain, right? That kind of opens what is the actual the channel itself. We call that the funding transaction, right? That itself is basically just like a special multisig output, on the chain itself. Right? So whenever you say a channel, it's basically kind of link back down.
So explain multisig for people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, definitely a fundamental concept. So basically, one of the cool things about Bitcoin basically has something called multisig, right? And it's basically the ability to kind of say, okay, well, these funds can move if me and my brother sign this, right? Or me and someone else sign it, right? So now at that point, you basically have what's similar to a joint account. There's no kind of in banking terms, right? And because we have this multisig output itself, this means that we can kind of set up some constraints to govern how the money is ever moved, right? So now, typically, the way we set things up, so I put money into this output. Let's say I put Bill 1 BTC BTC, you put one BTC in that point, we then kind of like have like joint control of that output, right? So that's effectively like what a channel is, right? Because now
So
like you
I
and I
have
can
a
like
portion. Yeah. So I
Mhm,
have a portion of the
mhm,
signature, right? And you
exactly.
have another portion of the signature. And for
Mhm.
it to be validated, I have to sign it, and then you have to sign it, and then that's what completes the transaction. Correct?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So now in this
Right.
case, I can't just steal your money because like, obviously, like, why would you sign something that gives me all the money? Right. You said, okay, well, no,
Right.
these are terms of contract. We said we're going to do this
That's,
thing. And
that's some
so
shady
you can't go
behavior.
from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, that's smart contract. Right? You can't like compel someone to do something otherwise, what's actually written in the chain itself. Right. But yeah, so as I was saying, like, in order to like get onto like the on-ramp, basically onto layer 2, you basically have one blocking transaction. Right. But now the thing is that like, you don't necessarily need to ever go back. Right. For example, I've had channels open for the past like, two plus years. Right. The thing is like, if you're assuming that like you can actually kind of like have like a closed economy in layer 2, you don't necessarily need to go back down, right? So for example, let's say I'm receiving my paycheck. Let's say I'm getting my paycheck streamed by the minute. Let's say I'm like paying for things online. Let's say I'm doing donations or whatever else. I can actually just like have everything operate in the network, on the layer 2 concept itself. But if I ever do want to actually like, fully withdraw, you can kind of like close that like account. Basically, you can kind of view it almost like a checking and savings account, right? Bitcoin base chain is basically my savings account. Checking account is basically to my Lightning wallet. Maybe it's like $100, $200, like $20. It's not really that much money, and so I want to keep that in the upper layer. But then if I were to want to actually like withdraw and basically like close that account down, then I pay another on-chain fee basically to actually then close that transaction, right? So potentially I can just do that one on-chain fee. It's also the case where it's like, let's say like there's some like service, the service can even kind of like, pay the on-chain fee for me. So like kind of like, like an onboarding cost for their users to let me onboard onto the Lightning Network itself. Right. So that's the thing. Like, so once you're actually, and the other cool thing is that like, once you're actually off chain, fees are typically much cheaper. Right. And you can also send like very, very small amounts of money. Basically imagine like me, like, watching you maybe like streaming or for this podcast, for example, let's say like I'm sending you maybe like a 1K Satoshi is like a second, right? Which is, around like 50 cents a second, right? There's really nothing else, as far as like, payment systems in the world that can support like very, very small value transactions like that at the speed that Lightning can clear, right? So that's what kind of like Lightning is very like uniquely capable of doing, kind of like sending very small transactions, around the world in a decentralized fashion. And things set up very fairly quickly with fairly low fees as well.
Got it. So, and that's very important for the overall scalability of Bitcoin. As the network grows and more people adopt it, we're going to need faster and faster transactions. So that's
Exactly.
how the importance that it comes down to. So actually, let's talk a little bit about Lightning Labs. What sort of new projects you guys working on? What's something that's really that you're excited about? I want to hear about what you guys are doing with the team.
No, definitely, yeah, definitely have a bunch of cool projects. It's one of the things where it's like we have to like pick and choose because we have so many ideas. Obviously, kind of like have to like really like put like your resources in one particular.
I know some
direction,
things might be on the hush hush, so you don't have to go through the 007 files. Yeah,
sure. Like one thing that we launched last year and definitely like getting a lot more uptake now, which I'm really excited about, is something we call like Lightning Pool, right? So like as I mentioned a little bit earlier, you can basically say, okay, well, like kind of like Lightning is kind of like it's like upper like or kind of like alternative like highway, you can say, right? Kind of like above the actual main chain itself, right? So the one question is, okay, well, if like you can say like my channels are kind of like roads, or how do I even like like fund roads on this like network itself, right? Or how do I even like make sure I have connectivity? So what Lightning Pool is, it basically lets you kind of like put up your Bitcoin and effectively lease it by kind of like creating like a row for somebody else, right? So like let's say like I have like one idle Bitcoin and like someone wants to actually come up and like maybe like offer like a service, maybe they're a merchant on Lightning itself, right? They need kind of like roads inbound to them, which are basically payment channels in order so they can receive. It's kind of like bandwidth, or like you basically need to kind of like have like an ISP and like have them like get fiber to like your home. In this case, the actual fiber is like virtual, right? So it's kind of like a marketplace to basically let individuals kind of like put up that like Bitcoin real estate basically, and then earn a yield from that, right? So for example, like let's say I had a bunch of Bitcoin just sitting around, and so it's a thing where it's like people need to like pay for that payment bandwidth, and like because it's decentralized, there's no one person you go and say, okay, well, hey, AT&T, can I get fiber to my home? Okay, well, you're in Arkansas, we can't, right? Like that doesn't exist. It's just the internet. So anyone can basically you can pay someone to make that channel towards you, and they basically get kind of like interest payments, kind of like a yield off of that Bitcoin itself. And it's got a lot bigger. So I think like over a week ago, we kind of like crossed like a 50 BTC mark as far as the amount of channels bought and sold through the network, which is around like $3 million or so, depending on the current value of Bitcoin. So it's a really cool thing because now you kind of like see how you can actually like put your Bitcoin to use and kind of like earn passive yield on it. But the same way has a bunch of really cool concepts. For example, it's not custodial. It's fully transparent. It's fully verifiable. It has some really cool concepts in there as far as kind of like how you build applications on top of Bitcoin, kind of like a more advanced manner as well too. So that's something I'm really excited about that we shipped last year. We're getting a lot more uptake on it. We have a bunch of really cool updates coming from that as well too.
Wow. Okay. So Lightning Pool, where so if I set up a Lightning node, I'm almost my own bandwidth provider, and other people other people can pay me to use my bandwidth.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And in this case, like the bandwidth is exactly. In this case, the bandwidth is basically your Bitcoin, which is like property. So it's kind of a thing where, okay, like you build a house somewhere else, someone can basically come in there and like you can lease the house to them basically. And you get kind of cash flow.
So is there a minimum? Hold on. So is there a minimum amount of Bitcoin that I need to stake almost in order to uphold this?
In a sense, yeah. So basically, like the way it is, it's like an auction. The auction basically happens like every 10 minutes, right? So people kind of like put up orders as far as like buying and selling at a particular kind of like interest rate. But typically people quote interest rates in kind of like a per year, right? But in this case, it's actually per block. Right, so we kind of like, so it's kind of like a thing where you kind of like quantize a little bit more to get it on a per block basis. But in the system right now, I think the default, the minimum size is like 100k satoshis, which is like around, I guess that's like 500, no, that's $50 or so. And you can go from there on as well too. But it's one of the things again where it's like, because it's like an open thing, like a routing node in a sense, like also, it's almost like a hobby, right? Because you kind of have to tinker with it. You have to kind of like adjust the fees. You have to optimize it, things like that as well too. So we kind of like have this like system in place where we're able to kind of like, kind of like do ratings on the routing nodes themselves, right? So for example, like, let's say you're buying a used car, right? You wouldn't want to like, you want to have like, things like the actual mileage, like the history of it, things like that as well too. Because otherwise there's kind of like this asymmetry with what they call kind of like a market for lemons, where you don't really know exactly as much about the car as the seller does, right? So we want to kind of like eliminate that. So we have this rating system that we have in place to kind of like, rank the nodes to make sure that if someone's like buying, so let's say I'm Square, I'm buying channels, I want to make sure I'm getting it from like, the top tier of nodes, because like, the Bitcoin is there, but also like there's kind of like a difference in like the utility of the channel based on the skill of the node operator, right? If it's not managed well, if the node's offline all the time, has really bad fees, things like that, that's going to become like a lower quality product. So we also kind of like have this like rating system in the marketplace as well to make sure individuals can at least kind of like reduce some of the information asymmetry to have like a better marketplace that kind of like serves both the buyers and sellers more effectively.
Can people work on that now? Is that something that we can be a part of today, or is it still how far along the process?
Yeah, good question. Really good question. Yeah, so it's live today. People can use it right now. So like, effectively what you need kind of like Lightning node. We make something called LND, because like, Lightning is kind of like a protocol and there's several different implementations of it. Lightning Labs make one of them called LND. Then we have this tool called Terminal, and basically Terminal is kind of like a UI for this. So you can basically like open an account, put in orders, make a bid, like do things like that as well too. And we also released something recently, which is meant to kind of like, help, coach node operators, basically give them a little bit more kind of like guidance as to kind of like how to improve their system, right? Because the way the system works, we kind of like have like a rating system, and like people initially were kind of like a little bit more like in the dark as far as like how do I actually improve my nodes. It's something that we got like a lot of like feedback on, because like if you can improve your node, you basically make more money because you start to route more on routing fees, and then also you can actually then sell more channels on Lightning Pool itself too. So we kind of like have this new tool. It's called like Terminal Web. Basically, you can kind of like put in your pub key, and then it basically says okay, well you need more channels. Your fees are too high. You need to improve your uptime, and then from there on, you can kind of like have a little more like direct recommendations in the future. Basically, let people improve the routing node over time.
Got it. Well, I know why you're the CTO. Your mind works fast, man.
I'm trying to be slow. I'm trying to speak slow. I get too excited about this stuff.
I'm trying to slow down, but I'm Flash. I can't help it. I'm Flash. Nah, I'm keeping up though. I'm keeping up with you.
Okay. No, yeah, I see like flipping some light bulbs in there now. Like,
no, definitely. Yeah, let's get a little bit into your history. How did you first get into the industry, and decentralized networks? What first piqued your interest?
Oh yeah, really good question. So I guess it probably goes back like I think the first time I really heard about Bitcoin was like in college. This was my freshman year. I went to school at UCSB. So back then, like I kind of like I wasn't really doing CS yet. I kind of like was in this kind of like undeclared, but I wanted to do it eventually. So I didn't really have like I wasn't coding since I was like 5 years old. I went to code basically like this is my second year of college. Basically right in terms of like for real. Mm-hmm. So like there was this person on the dorm, and then he was like had up basically like Silk Road at the time. right? And everyone was like, whoa, like, what is this? Like, how is it working? How is it not shut down? How does the government not know about this thing? Like, how can you even do this at all? And like, so that back then I was like, okay, something's weird here. I don't understand how this can exist. There's some like, missing component in like my world model, in a sense, like how can like this type of technology really exist? I was okay, whatever else, let me get out of this room, someone's a Fed or something, let me get out of here. And then later on, like, right? Then I think maybe like a year
phone
or
is
so
tapped.
later,
Okay.
yeah, right? Like,
listening.
how can this be here, right? Because it just like, I was like, all right, I know where not to go now, right? Like, then maybe like a year later or so, like I kind of like had a little more knowledge in kind of like, computer science in general. I could program at that point. I kind of like knew exactly what components worked. Then I was like, then I heard about it again. This was like, at this point, I guess like 2012 or so. And I was like, oh, okay, like let me try to read the paper. Because then there's the paper. I was like, okay, like I can like, do some research, things like that. I read the paper. I didn't understand anything at all. I was like, okay, like something's missing here still. Like, I have like some kind of fundamental like gap in my knowledge once again, basically. Remember at that point, I kind of like, went through like citations. I was like, okay, let me just kind of like go from bottom up. Let me see exactly how things are constructed. How can I really start to understand it? So I read a bunch of like citations in the paper itself. And then I was like, oh, and I think I remember I like kind of like ended up at kind of like something called like new directions of cryptography, kind of like the beginning like modern cryptography as we know right now. And I was like, okay, well, this seems really powerful, right? Like, it kind of like allows like commerce anywhere on the internet. It's fully decentralized. I can use it right now. Like this is complete with the U.S. dollar. So I think then that kind of like even like put me down a level of rabbit hole. So I was like, okay, well, this has shifted my world model tremendously. Someone just made a currency out of nowhere. It's open source. I can run the code. I can send money to anyone, anywhere. This is massive. Why is no one else freaking out about this? And then I think from there on, I was always like the kid, like, any like class project, they were like, okay, let's do it on Bitcoin. So I was like the crazy Bitcoin kid at that point, because I was like, okay, like there's nothing else that's really as cool as this, as what's going on at that point. And then so it kind of like led me to like, get more into things like cryptography, distributed systems, operating systems as well, through all my projects, doing courses and things like that. And then eventually, I guess, like I ended up doing some internships like Google. And so, like, Israel kind of ended up being like kind of like in the Bay Area, like around like, 2015, 2014 or so. And like around that point, it was kind of like, I guess, coincidental, where you can say like SF at that point was kind of like maybe like the Bitcoin developer capital of the world at that point, right? Like all the Bitcoin developers like lived in SF basically. But this was still when it was like, pretty small. So I kind of like had the opportunity to like ask a bunch of questions. We went to meetups, we had like hackathons, things like that as well too. So it allowed me to kind of like really, more so kind of like level up very more quickly, basically in the space at that point too. And I started working on my own ideas. I remember like I was like in this like this class, basically working on kind of like wireless networking. So I was kind of basically like, okay, like, in the future, let's say like have like two like self-driving cars. Like, what if I want to like pay one of the cars to like let me get ahead? How do I like, do things like toll booths? How do I like pay for parking garages? Okay, well, we need some type of like, payment system that allows me to kind of like communicate wirelessly to like another car, or maybe to like, some like gate to basically like where that really work at. So then I discovered payment channels at that point. It's like, okay, like let me try to make this thing. I remember like I tried to like, make my own version of Lightning back then, and I just didn't know enough. I was like, okay, like I remember like I was like keyword. I was like, okay, what now? Like I don't really know. So like once again, let me go back to the drawing board. Let me kind of like a little bit more information about what's going on, really.
But actually, what drew you? What drew you to the Lightning Network? Was that just a natural pull to?
Yeah, super good question. I mean, so like, so at that point, like payment channels were kind of like known, right? But the payment channels at that point, like, this like pre-Lightning were only like, one directional basically, right? I can only like send money in one direction. That's not very exciting because obviously, like, our exhausted balance, I have to close that out, spend more chain fees. So it was also the case where like, people hadn't really figured out the whole network aspect yet as well. So, the utility of it was kind of like very reduced, right? So like I was kind of like working on like step one, making them like bi-directional. So I can send money in both directions, like this, like, two different cars, right? And so I remember like at that point, like, I think it was like February, like 2015 or so, like Lightning paper dropped. And I was like, yo, they've done it. Like, this is what I'm trying to do. Like, forget all this. Let me go talk to them. Like, I like basically threw all my stuff out, basically started emailing them, talking to them on Twitter, things like that. So it was kind of a thing where like I just saw like we were going in the same direction, and they were just so far where I was at that time. I was like, okay, let me like, go to the dojo, let me learn a bunch of stuff and really, like see if we can make this thing actually happen at that point. So it's more that like, I was working on something like related at the time, and I just thought that, okay, well, they're ahead of me. Let me just go join them, basically, and move this thing forward and save everybody time. And that's kind of like, that was the progression somewhat.
So what would you recommend those who are following your same footsteps, right? That want to get into the industry, whether it's the Lightning Network or just working on decentralized networks in general. What would you recommend them on a skill basis? What should they be a part of hackathons? What should they do?
Very good question. Yeah, so definitely working on some things like, to help people like this in the background. Maybe maybe later this year we'll get some more information on that. But I would definitely say like, I think the way I like learned this myself was kind of like just like try to like think of like a project idea and like basically try to implement that, right? I feel like along the way implementing it, you kind of like realize like what like you're missing, like knowledge gap wise, basically, which will for us to basically to fill that in, then basically try that again, and you can basically say like over time, like as you kind of like take on like bigger and bigger projects yourself, you can kind of like start to fill in that gap. But I guess as far as kind of like initial knowledge, obviously like read the Bitcoin white paper is like one against like it's a very like short document, like, very like dense with information, right? Like you can read like a paragraph and be like, yo, right? Like right? Like you come back to it like a month later, like, oh, this is what, this, and then right, like that happens to me, sometimes still. I mean, it's one of the greatest documents in the world as far as at this point. Like,
it's so dense because it doesn't take in just the technical aspect, but also the social, political,
exactly,
monetary system. It just incorporates 4 or 5 different spheres, all into 8-9 pages.
Exactly. So, no, it's amazing. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things as well where I was like, okay, like all these things are just like linked somehow, kind of like politics, money, like kind of like social aspect, like commerce, like just even like, like people's freedoms, like the nations, like, because to me, I was just like, I've discovered an entirely new world. And like, I guess it's kind of like the whole Matrix thing, where you say you take the orange pill, the red pill, right? It's like, okay, well, you got unjacked. And you're looking around like, y'all see this shit too? No, like, and you're like, damn.
That's the feeling. And then you look around, you're just like, nobody else know about this? Like, what's going on?
But and then you see people wake up, your friends ask you questions a few years later. They're like, oh, what about that thing? Is it still around? I'm like, okay, like, come on, like, let's sit down, let's go to lunch. And like,
it's surprising how long. It's surprising how long the journey is, though. For certain people, and then also just for anybody, like it's a lifelong journey. We're constantly learning more and more. And when they talk about, diving down the rabbit hole, that's for real.
Oh, like, no, it takes time. Yeah.
You can go hundreds of hours and like, you're still learning. You're still learning because so many disciplines are interconnected. So so I don't feel as bad when I'm explaining to my friends and they're just like, I don't really get it. I think it's just a pump and dump scheme or whatever.
Yeah, it's gonna go away
between this and Doge, right? And it's just like, oh, you just no. It's like, they're trying to make a quick buck, and I'm like, it's more than that. It's more than that.
It definitely takes a while, because I would say maybe it took me maybe like 2 to 3 years when I started actually like learning about it, when I felt like, okay, I can like do something with it, right? Like, I think the thing as well, because like it definitely takes like a very like large like cognitive shift, because you invalidate a lot of things that you learned in the past, right? Like also they were like, what do you mean the US dollar isn't backed by gold? I was like, 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 what do you mean? Like, you can, like, inflation? Like, that's how central, like, right?
Yeah.
Exactly, right? Then you start learning about the monetary system, you're just like, whoa, like, this is huge, right? Like, you see that, like, like Mr. Krabs meme where he's like, whoa, like, that's that's what it is, right? When you're talking to, and they're like, what do you mean? They're like, dude. I'm like, yeah. Like, this is it, bro. Like, so it's always like interesting, like, conversation when you like really get someone onto it. And, like, you can see them in their eyes. They're like, yo, like, they're like invalidating, like years of like just like education, basically. So it's definitely like a powerful feeling.
Where would you like to see the Lightning Network in 5 years, and what would that look like?
Really good question. Yeah, this is definitely something, we think about all the time, strategy, moving things forward. And I think the thing that always like, I think like, I feel like I had this feeling maybe in like 2019, so I was like, okay, things are really accelerating super quickly, right? Like, just because even for them, I was been in Bitcoin, for a few years at that point, like I just saw people like asking about it. Like, I remember like my dad had some Bitcoin. He wanted me like talk to the family in like Nigeria about it. Like, they knew what it was and everything, right? So, so I mean, so I guess the way I view things is that like, I think Lightning will start to be used more and more, kind of like more like closely interacting with like the web itself, right? It's like, right now, whenever like you're doing something as far as like payments on the web right now, typically maybe you have to like, take out your phone, you have to do a payment, or maybe like, you actually have to put in your credit card, right? So I guess where I want to head to is basically, actually having Lightning Node embedded in your browser. Right. And like once actually in the browser at that point, it's like anything else. It's kind of like, okay, well, everyone already has like a Bitcoin wallet, everyone has Lightning wallet because actually directly in the browser. I think it has a bunch of really cool things. Basically, then imagine like, rather than like you going and like paying like $50 for some paywall in like Wall Street Journal because you want to read some article, about like Mars, you basically just give them, 2 cents. Right, like that isn't possible today at all, right? Because of all the paywall things like that as well too. So then we even go beyond that, like let's say that like you're not going to basically like pay someone like just directly for like their content, as far as like maybe it's like them doing writing, maybe some like, creating some video, and I can do that even by in a case where it's like more like a streaming payment, right? So let's say I'm like watching some concert, and like rather than like me paying like $20 for the concert ticket itself, I can basically stream them maybe like to like $20 like an hour or something like that, right? Or even less than that. Let's say I pay them like $1 every like second or so, right? So I think like the future I think is basically like viewing Lightning more. It's kind of like
you could do that across borders too. Yeah,
exactly. The thing is like that's the thing about that. You can do that cross borders. There's zero sign up. There's zero barrier to entry. There's zero gatekeepers. There's zero login. There's no user information at all. I don't need to know your address. You basically just tell me like how do I you give me an invoice basically on Lightning, and I can send you your pub key just like that itself, right? It's also completely cross border because even at that point too, you can say okay, like the marginal cost of like someone actually getting set up is basically just like having like a computer, which are a little more widespread now, like even your phone, and then some Bitcoins to basically make see to start with. The other thing is I can imagine like the future you basically start to like earn your money, or like earn like your paycheck over Bitcoin itself. But then imagine if that like paycheck that you're earning is basically streamed to you in real time over Lightning, right? And you're basically like streaming that elsewhere outwards to maybe like pay for like a server cost or something like that too. I think the world's moving to basically kind of like having like transaction to be a lot more kind of like quicker and micro basically, because like there's really no reason that I'm paying I get paid like every like month or so. That's basically like legacy banking things like things take a while to transfer, wire transfer, things like that. So it's basically like moving to basically like more like a kind of like a real time thing directly integrated into the web itself. So basically like rather than like me just like doing like an upload when I click on like Reddit, that would then just like just be a direct payment. And then boom, because like people in the past have said, okay, well, micropayments would never work because like the like kind of like mental transaction costs are too high, right? I think we can like lower that, make it a lot more like streamlined, basically by kind of like more integrating directly into the web application themselves, then kind of like having like a user like more so like worry about kind of like what their budget is and like things like max limits. So let's say okay, well I want to stream, but my budget is like $5, and boom takes that into account. Like if I reach that, basically lets me do it again. So rather than like me clicking okay every single time I want to do it, basically it does in the background. Then at that point too, like imagine something like getting on the web, like that's how it should be. It's kind of like more integrated into it. There's no like Stripe, there's no Visa, there's no MasterCard, there's no PayPal, all these middlemen that in between all these transactions on the web. Right. It's just between me and the other individual. Exactly, feel peer-to-peer. Someone helps me with that transaction, but they're only doing so because they're getting paid. Right? So like whenever like this is something I guess we skipped a little bit earlier. Like whenever you're running routing node, you're actually like routing transactions, you collect a fee from that transaction once again, because like we mentioned earlier, you basically kind of like leasing out your bandwidth, basically help that payment go through forward, right? Now this is a really cool thing because now as more and more users come into Lightning Network itself, it becomes more and more profitable to actually run a Lightning node, which then actually kind of like attracts more capital to the Lightning system itself, which then attracts more opportunities, which then attracts more kind of like innovation. It's a really cool flywheel that you can get going on there. And this is a really cool thing because now at this point, there's no barriers, there's no gatekeepers. It doesn't even like, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog, that whole thing, right? Like, you can just set a payment. It doesn't really matter. Now you can imagine at this point as well, where like, some like new entrepreneur, let's say like some kid in like Nigeria or somewhere else, basically just like, get set up, is to start accepting money, start like, paying out to like their various like, employees, start like, doing things like server costs, all like that, which are all fully integrated in kind of like this module, which is basically Lightning running on their server, running on people's browsers, running on their phone, running everywhere else. Because it's kind of a thing, like, once again, you see stuff like where like, the Apple like store, they're getting like sued by Epic, they make like Fortnite, things like that, because they're taking too much money, 30%, 40%, from the actual thing. At that point, it's okay, well, what if I have Lightning on my phone and I just paid them directly, or they paid me directly, right? Like you can't, you can't stop that, right? So I'm all about removing these gatekeepers, removing the barriers, and just letting things actually flow through and innovate, and just like having more freedom generally, and also giving people like more ability to basically earn money, over time, from their home, wherever they are, as long as they have access to the internet, and maybe a little bit of Bitcoin, which maybe they earn by doing some tasks. Maybe they translated, something. Maybe they wrote a book about something. Maybe they wrote an article. I guess we're heading towards. You talk about this whole creator economy thing, where you can't have a creator economy if it's not global. Right, because once again, like they're looking at these like very like like targeted pockets. Okay, I'm a Substack, X New York Times writer, blah blah blah. Like no, that's not really where we want to go. Like we want to empower all these people around the world basically that don't have access to credit cards or these other institutions, things like that. That for example, like even to something has changed, maybe you need like an ID, you need like some like utility bill. A lot of people don't even really have that, or like why would they accept it from like Nigeria if I was going to some U.S. exchange, right? So at this point, it's basically like zooming a lot out, basically integrating the rest of the world basically. To like let them skip over like the old tech, forget all the Apples, forget the Googles, basically just go directly to what's actually maps on the ground there, and basically remove all the barriers, which is basically at many times just even like getting commerce and accepting money and things like that. Right.
So basically, you're describing a future that has borderless, real-time transactions without any intermediary. That's what it comes down
no intermediaries, no gatekeepers, no like login, no
if I want to pay you for a service, I can just pay you by the minute. literally
Yeah,
from
you
my
just
phone to
yeah,
yours,
exactly.
and
I
it
don't need to know
happens
where you
instantly.
are. I don't need to know your
Yeah.
name. I don't need to know your nationality. I don't need the last 4 digits of your social. Like
What
I
country you're
just get the
from?
money.
Yep.
Exactly, right? It's just it's
Yep.
about like kind of like lowering that friction basically
Wow.
which exists right now that kind of like impedes so much economic activity right now that we're seeing people kind of like become a little bit more excited about. They're seeing people like kind of like young people on TikTok doing a bunch of crazy things like that as well too.
Mm-hmm.
Even them themselves, do they have a bank account? Can they get a credit card? What's their credit score? Like who knows all this stuff, right? Like this
We're starting to
all
see
of that.
that now. We're starting to see that
Mm-hmm.
now with the
Mm-hmm.
creators,
Mm-hmm.
especially let's say streaming, and
Yep.
the followers, they can donate in real
Uh-huh.
time.
Yeah.
But I see that scaling up and growing to just a global way, and not just streaming,
Mm-hmm.
obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what
Mm-hmm.
first comes to mind is like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm listening to the streamer, I'm going to
Yep.
donate $5, I'm going to tip them
Uh-huh.
$5,
Uh-huh.
whatever.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's just going to be even more seamless
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
faster. So
Yeah, and this is
no
starting today as well. Like, the bunch of popular application right now, they basically use Lightning to basically allow people to kind of like host podcasts on these platforms that kind of like allow individuals to kind of like boost them or like tip them as listen to the podcast themselves.
is
This is
that
really
like
cool.
Sphinx, or that's just the messaging? That's the
Yeah. So
messenger.
Sphinx has integrated this into like their wallet as well. There's another startup they call Breeze also integrates it themselves as well too. This is really cool because now like people can kind of like because like you can kind of like share it. So like now like our operative podcast kind of like is exactly like the engagement, right? Because okay, well I got $10 for this like line right here versus this one. But you can kind of like see kind of like even curate exactly like what your user are wanting. I think I saw someone else. They kind of like had this like it's like a poll basically. They're kind of like, hey, what's the podcast we on next? They kind of had a bunch of knowledge and people kind of get a tip. Kind of like a small amount of social media, like 2 or 3K social. So you kind of like have that like additional engagement and basically kind of like find the signal as to like what people actually want to
You're voting with your wallet.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's definitely starting. It's a little bit more like nascent right now, but I think it has a bunch of potential. Once we remove a lot of the barriers, basically like have it directly integrated into kind of like someone's browser or an application, basically to like kind of like reduce all the friction in order to actually get from 0 to 1 as far as them like learning about and actually using it in the first place.
Beautiful. Well, man, this world that you guys are creating, will love to live in it. So keep on doing what you're doing.
Yeah. We're getting close. So things are just like they're getting, it's like things are very much accelerating, like getting like quicker and quicker. People know about these stuff now. Like you have like Tom Brady talking about like like Twitter, you got like right. You got Russell like Okun like talking to everyone in the NFL, get him on audio as well too. Because once again, people are realizing like. I feel like everyone's having this like shift at the same time. Like, okay, wait, I just got this stimmy check. Like, where'd it come from? Like, you mean like did they borrow the money? No, they printed the money. Like, wait, what do you mean? Like, and then like, okay, well, I can just like invest that in some random dog coin. Like wait, like you know what I mean, right? Yeah. So like the thing is like obviously that's noise, but I think it's gonna like at least shift their like kind of like their
collective consciousness, man.
Exactly. So now it's all syncing up. Yeah. So it takes some time. There's definitely like like a circuitous path. Maybe people like lose some money unfortunately or kind of like go down like some other path, but eventually they come back and say, okay, well, Bitcoin is a global thing. You can't stop it. It's out here already. Even other nations are looking like, we got to get in front of this thing right now. The U.S. is behind. Technically, they're kind of like trying to like maybe even like start like slow down the innovation of it. So like it's a massive force.
Yeah, well, that's the final stage. That's the final stage when nations and central banks decide to put it in their treasuries. But that's a whole nother conversation. But for this, I feel like we're friends now, so I can call you roast beef. So
okay, sure, yeah. We're like an hour into it. Well, that's cool.
So if people want to get more information from you or ask you more questions, how can they get in contact? What should they do?
Probably the best place is like Twitter. I'm on there a good bit. I'm roast beef on Twitter. That's roast beef with no T. Definitely check me out on that. That's probably like the thing I respond to. Emails, not so much these days, but definitely hit me up on Twitter. That's where I'm super active. And like DM me, tag me on something. I'll respond. Ideally pretty soon, and just like and just like engage people from there too, which is a really exciting thing.
Perfect. Well, thank you for this Lightning Network masterclass, and I hope to hear from you again, man.
Yeah. Thanks so much. This is dope.